For 7 long years, a billionaire's little girl lived inside a bubble of quiet that money could not break. On that hot afternoon, she sat on a bench outside a glass hospital building, her small hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes staring at the cars moving by. Beside her stood her father, a man whose face was on magazine covers, who owned towers of steel and glass that touched the clouds, and yet right now he could not fix the one thing that mattered most. Then a skinny black girl in a faded yellow t-shirt and worn-out pink sandals stopped walking past. She stared at the rich man's daughter, at the way she kept rubbing the side of her ear like something inside hurt. The poor girl tilted her head, squinted, and stepped closer. Nobody called her name. Nobody asked her to help, but she moved anyway. In less than 2 minutes, that girl reached out, touched the rich child's ear, and pulled out something small and dark that did not belong there at all. The billionaire's daughter jerked, gasped, and for the first time in her entire life she heard a sound. She heard the roar of a car. She heard a bird scream across the sky. She heard her own voice when she cried. What came out of her ear was not wax. It was not dirt. It was a piece of plastic and foam that looked like it had been cut to fit just right, pushed deep where no one should ever put anything. For a full second, nobody spoke. Then the girl who pulled it out whispered words that made every adult in that space go cold inside. She said, "Someone put this there so she would never hear you. Before I tell you how this moment even happened, do something for me right now. Tap that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, your couch, your bus ride, your lunch break. Because the truth behind this little object will make you look twice at the people you trust around your own family." 7 years earlier, the city had watched a fairy tale turn sad. The man on the hospital roof that night was named Daniel Hayes, and at that time people said his name with respect and fear. He was tall, with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that never seemed to relax, always tense like he was carrying the weight of 10 lives. His company built malls, airports, schools, and luxury homes that looked like palaces. He had grown up poor in a small house with a leaking roof, and he had promised himself that his children would never know what it meant to want anything. When his first and only child was born on a stormy night, he held her in his arms and thought his life was finally perfect. The nurses said, "She's healthy, she's strong." The monitors beeped. The doctors smiled. He and his wife, a soft-eyed woman named Rachel with kind hands, looked at the little girl's tiny fingers and cried from joy. They had already chosen a name. They called her Ella. For the first 24 hours, nothing seemed wrong. Ella slept, made tiny faces, kicked her feet. Daniel spent that whole day walking between the nursery and the big windows of the hospital, making phone calls, telling his friends and business partners that his daughter had arrived. People sent flowers. His office sent a diamond rattle as a joke. The press posted pictures of the family leaving the hospital. It all looked perfect on the outside. First sign that something was not normal came on the second night. A metal tray crashed to the floor in the hospital hallway. Every baby in the nursery jumped and cried. Every tiny face scrunched up. Every little mouth opened wide, except one. Ella's eyes stayed calm. She blinked once like nothing had happened and then went back to staring at the ceiling. The nurse who saw it thought she was just tired. She wrote nothing in the chart. Another nurse noted that the baby was very quiet, a good sleeper. No one pressed deeper. When they took her home, the house staff whispered that it felt like a dream. The Hayes mansion stood on top of a hill, 3 floors of glass and stone, with a gate that opened only when a camera recognized the right car. Inside, everything was soft light and rich wood. A grand piano sat in the living room, tuned perfectly even though no one played it, just in case a guest might know how. The nursery had been built months before, with a white crib, a star-shaped mobile, a rocking chair, and shelves lined with stuffed animals that still had tags. Daniel hired the best nanny he could find, a woman in her 50s with years of experience, gentle eyes, and a calm voice. Her name was Miss Turner, and on paper she was perfect. She had worked for other rich families. She had letters of praise. She had a quiet way of moving through rooms that made the baby relax. For a while, everyone thought things were fine. But as the months passed, Rachel became the first person to feel that something was not right. She noticed that when the blender roared in the kitchen, Ella did not startle. When the dog barked right beside her, the baby only smiled at his moving mouth. When a door slammed, she kept playing with her fingers. At first, the pediatrician told them not to worry. "Some bobbies are just calm," he said. "Give it time, she is still small, but a mother knows." One morning, when Ella was about 10 months old, Rachel stood behind her in the living room. The baby sat on a soft mat, hitting a toy drum with her hand. "Ella," Rachel called, not loud, just normal. The little girl did not turn. "Sweetheart," she tried again, louder this time, no response. Then she clapped hard right behind the baby's head. Still nothing. It was like her child was underwater and every sound stayed above the surface. When she told Daniel, he frowned, shook his head, and said, "Maybe she's just focused." He didn't want to hear it. His company was getting ready for a massive project. He had meetings starting at sunrise, calls that went past midnight. He told himself his wife was tired, that new mothers worried about everything. But that night when he walked into the nursery and saw the same thing happen, heard the same silence, something inside him broke. The next week became a blur of tests. They went to the best hospital in the city. Doctors made funny faces at Ella, shook noisemakers, clanged metal, called her name from different sides. She smiled at everyone, reaching for shiny things but never reacting to sound. They sent her brain scans to specialists in Europe. They flew to a clinic in Germany where a doctor with silver hair and calm hands checked her ears and said gently, "She was born this way, it is not your fault." The words hit Daniel like a punch. Born this way. He could buy buildings, he could buy planes, but he could not buy his little girl a single sound. They tried hearing aids. They tried tiny devices that wrapped around her head. She would wear them sometimes because her parents begged her, but nothing changed. The world stayed soft and empty for her when she turned 2. They started teaching her sign language. At first, Daniel refused. He said, "We are not giving up. She will hear. There must be a way." But Ella's eyes lit up when her teacher showed her how to say mom and dad with her fingers. Rachel began to see their daughter's world open up, just in a different way. She would sit on the floor with her, copying signs, laughing when they made mistakes. The nanny, Miss Turner, watched from the doorway, smiling. Daniel stood further back, arms crossed, fighting a war inside himself every time he saw his daughter move her hands instead of her mouth. Years slid by in a strange mix of love and pain. The house changed. Loud music stopped. Doors closed more softly. The dog wore a bell on his collar so Ella could see him coming. The little girl grew into a 7-year-old with tight curls pulled into a ponytail and bright brown eyes that missed nothing. She watched lips carefully when people spoke. She tapped shoulders instead of calling out names. She liked to sit by windows and feel the hum of the city through the glass. Everyone in the house learned to speak with their hands. The cook, the driver, the housekeeper, even the security guards at the gate knew basic signs like stop, wait, and good morning. The only person who never seemed fully comfortable with it was Daniel. He tried, he really tried. He took classes, he practiced with videos, he stayed up late tracing signs in the air alone in his office. But he could not stop the thoughts that crawled in at night. What if he had caught it sooner? What if he had chosen a different doctor? What if he had prayed harder? Guilt wrapped around his chest like wire. He poured more of himself into work, building more things, making more money, as if success in one area could cover the crack in another. By the time Ella was 7, the city knew her as the quiet princess of the Hayes Empire. She went to a special school where all the children had hearing problems. She rode in a big black car with tinted windows. She had teachers, therapists, and doctors who checked her every year. Every test said the same thing: profound hearing loss, likely from birth, no clear physical blockage, condition appears permanent. That line, no clear physical blockage, became a strange comfort and a curse. It meant nothing could be fixed, but it also meant no one was to blame. At least that was what everyone thought, until the day in front of the hospital. That morning had started like any other. The sun was bright, painting the city in gold. Drivers honked. Street sellers called out their goods. Inside the mansion, the smell of coffee filled the air. Daniel stood by the kitchen island, reading an email about a new project. His phone buzzed nonstop. Rachel poured juice into a glass, glanced at the stairs, and signed to him, "You promised to come today." He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and signed back, "I have a meeting." She set the glass down a little harder than she meant to. Juice splashed over the rim. "You always have a meeting," she said out loud and with her hands. "Today is important. It is the last test. They said there is a new scan. Maybe it will show us something new. Please, Danny." He looked at her and then at his phone. There was a part of him that wanted to believe in miracles and another part that had built a thick wall against hope. Hope had hurt too many times. Finally, he slipped his phone into his pocket and nodded. "Okay, I'll come." He went upstairs to get Ella. She was in her room, sitting on the floor with a notebook. She was drawing pictures of hands making shapes in the air, a silent alphabet in colored pencils. When he stepped into the doorway, she looked up and grinned. Her smile was the one thing that made him feel like he could breathe again. He put his hand over his heart, then moved it outward. "Good morning," he signed. She repeated the sign and then drew a little sun in the corner of her page. He walked over, sat beside her, and showed her the sign for hospital. She frowned, then nodded slowly. Hospitals meant more tests, more people touching her, more machines. She did not love them, but she had learned to be brave. On the way there, she pressed her forehead against the car window, watching people on the sidewalk. She saw a man juggling 3 oranges at a street corner. She saw a woman with a baby on her back laughing with someone. She saw kids running, their mouths wide open in shouts she could not hear. Her father looked at emails on his phone. Her mother watched both of them, fingers twisted in her lap. None of them knew that someone else's life was moving toward theirs at the same time. 2 blocks away, a 7-year-old black girl named Kayla walked barefoot down the same sidewalk that led to the hospital gates. Her sandals had broken that week, and her mother could not fix them yet, so she wore an old pair of pink ones with cracks in the straps. Her hair was pulled into small puffs with mismatched bands. She carried a plastic bag of empty bottles they planned to sell for a little money. Her mother, who worked as a cleaner in a small clinic, had brought her along because there was no one at home to watch her. They did not have a car, they did not have a driver, they had tired feet and a heart full of quiet prayers. Kayla was the kind of child who noticed everything. She could tell when her mother's smile was real and when it was fake. She could read signs faster than her classmates. She watched how nurses washed their hands, how doctors wore gloves, how people walked in and out of doors marked staff only. She loved to read old medical posters on the walls even if she did not understand all the big words. She saw pain every day and sometimes she wished she could fix it with her small hands. That morning, as they passed the big hospital where rich people went, she slowed down. The building was taller than the one her mother worked in. The glass shone. Big cars came and went. Security guards stood straight in uniforms. It looked like another world. On the front bench outside, she saw a girl about her age sitting alone while two adults stood a few steps away, arguing in sharp, tight movements. The girl on the bench had expensive clothes, shiny shoes, and curls that looked soft, but her eyes looked tired. She kept rubbing her ear like something inside hurt or tickled. Kayla felt a strange pull in her chest. Her mother, already walking ahead, called her name. "Hurry up," she said, not looking back, but Kayla's feet slowed down more. Something didn't feel right. The rich girl's father, still in his suit, stood near the door talking to a doctor in a white coat, his hands moving in quick, sharp signs mixed with spoken words. "We have done every test," the doctor said. "Today we check one more thing, but you must understand." His sentence trailed off when he realized the mother was looking away, her eyes fixed on her daughter, worry pushing tears to the edge. Rachel had noticed the rubbing too. She walked back to the bench, kneeled in front of Ella and signed, "Are you okay? Ear hurts." The little girl nodded and dug her finger near the edge, then pulled it away fast like something inside scared her. She pointed at her ear, then made a tiny sign that meant strange or funny. Just then Kayla reached them. The security guard had not stopped her yet because she was small and quick. She stood a few steps away, watching, clutching her plastic bag. Her heart beat faster. She remembered something from a poster in her mother's clinic that said, "Never put objects into a child's ear." The picture had shown a cartoon kid with beans, beads, and tiny things stuck in their ears. Most people would see a rich girl who had been deaf from birth and think, "There is nothing to do, it is sad, but it is fixed." Kayla saw something different. She saw the way the girl's fingers pressed not just at the outside, but a little deeper, like she was trying to reach something that had been there a very long time. Without knowing why, she took a step closer. "Excuse me," she said in a small voice. No one heard. Rachel's eyes were on her daughter. Daniel's back was still turned as he finished asking the doctor questions. The guard finally noticed the little girl and started walking toward her, ready to send her away. But before he could reach her, Ella did something that froze everyone in place. She looked up directly at Kayla and their eyes locked. In that instant, two worlds met, one filled with too much money and one with not enough food. Ella saw a child her age with broken sandals and kind eyes. Kayla saw a girl whose ears had never had a chance to be normal. It was like something inside both of them whispered, "Listen." Kayla lifted her hand slowly and pointed at her own ear, then at Ella's. She didn't know sign language, but she tried to use her body to talk. She tilted her head, squinted, and moved closer step by step, waiting for someone to stop her. No one did. Rachel saw the movement and turned, ready to pull her daughter away from a stranger. But then she saw the look on the poor child's face, focused, gentle, not asking for money or food, just looking at Ella like she saw something everyone else missed. "Wait," Rachel said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. The guard stopped, confused. "Ma'am," he asked. Daniel turned at the sound of his wife's voice. The doctor frowned. "Is there a problem?" Kayla swallowed. Her throat was dry. She knew she was not supposed to touch rich people. She knew someone might shout at her or push her away. But she also knew what she felt. She pointed at Ella's ear again and said a little louder, "Something is inside." The doctor shook his head before even checking. "Her ears have been examined many times," he said. "There is no blockage. It is a nerve issue. Please step back, young lady." Kayla did not move. She remembered long nights sitting outside her mother's clinic, watching nurses clean children's ears, pull out bits of cotton that parents had stuffed in or tiny toy parts toddlers had pushed inside. Sometimes the children had been in pain for weeks because no one thought to look deeper. She took another step, her hand shaking. "Please," she whispered, "let me see just once." Ella watched her lips and eyes. Then slowly she picked up her own small hand and touched her ear again, pressing closer to the canal. Her face crumpled into a tiny frown. She looked at her mother, then back at Kayla and nodded. That tiny nod broke the last piece of fear holding Kayla back. Rachel looked at her husband. For the first time in a long time, there was a strange thing in her eyes, hope mixed with terror. "Danny," she said softly, what if we are wrong?" He wanted to snap, to say, "This is crazy. We have seen experts." But his daughter's little face made his chest ache. He had chased science all over the world. He had tried medicine, machines, and money. Nothing had worked. What was the harm in letting one brave child look? He gave a small, stiff nod. The doctor lifted his hands in protest. "This is not safe," he said. "We cannot allow a stranger to perform any action on the child. There are risks of damage." But Rachel was already taking a cotton pad from her bag. She always carried a small kit just in case. She wet it with a little clean water from a bottle and held it out to Kayla. "If you hurt her, I will never forgive myself," she said in a trembling voice. "But if there is any chance," Kayla took the pad like it was made of glass. Her hands trembled. She moved closer until she stood right in front of Ella. "Hi," she said softly, even though she knew the girl could not hear. "I won't hurt you, okay?" Ella looked at her lips, watched them form the words, and something in her relaxed. She sat very still. Kayla lifted the pad to the edge of the ear and gently wiped away a little bit of wax at the outer rim. The doctor rolled his eyes and looked at Daniel as if to say, "See, nothing." But then Kayla saw it. It was not obvious. It was not big. It was not something a normal person would even know to look for. Deep inside the canal, almost the same color as skin, was a small, strange edge. It did not look like ear. It looked like a tiny curve of something foreign, smooth, and too perfect. Her heart hammered. "There," she breathed. "There is something there." The doctor stepped forward now, his face changing. "Impossible," he muttered, leaning in. He peered into the ear, but from where he stood he could not see what the child saw. Kayla knew she should back away and let the adults take over, but a strong feeling rose in her. It felt like all the nights she had wished she could fix one person, just one, instead of only watching. "I need her to lean this way," she said. Rachel gently tilted Ella's head to the side. Kayla put the pad aside and used the smallest finger on her hand, the one nurses used in the clinic when they had to be very gentle. She breathed in out and then very carefully slid her finger only a tiny bit inside, just enough to feel. There, a smooth piece. Her stomach turned. "Hold very still," she told Ella. The world around them shrank. Cars, people, birds, everything faded. Even Daniel stopped breathing. Kayla pinched her fingers together as much as she could, trying to grip the strange piece. For a second there was nothing, then she felt it give just a little. Slowly, slowly she pulled. Ella's eyes widened. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain, but from the weird feeling of something that had lived in her ear for years finally moving. The doctor leaned so close now that his nose almost touched the poor girl's hair. The guard forgot his job. Rachel's hand covered her mouth. Daniel's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. With one last gentle tug, something slid free. It was tiny, dark, and shaped like a little plug, with smooth sides and a thin edge that looked like it had been cut to fit. Kayla held it up between her fingers, her eyes huge. "It's not ear," she whispered. "Someone put this there." In that same second, a sound hit Ella's ears like sunlight breaking through thick clouds. A car horn blared on the street. A child laughed nearby. A bird screamed overhead. The wind rustled through leaves. All of it rushed into a space that had been quiet since the day she was born. She gasped. The gasp was loud to her own ears, and it scared her. She clapped her hands over the sides of her head and began to cry, not from sadness but from something she had no word for yet. Rachel's knees gave out. She fell onto the bench beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Baby," she cried, voice shaking. "Can you hear me?" Ella blinked. The sound of her mother's voice reached her, soft but real, and her eyes went wide in shock. Her lips trembled. "Mom." She said the word, rough and strange after years of silence, but perfect to everyone who heard it. Daniel stumbled forward like someone had pushed him. "Ella," he said, his voice breaking in half. "Baby girl, can you hear me?" She turned toward him, mouth open, chest heaving. She heard the deep sound of his voice, and she broke into a sob that sounded richer than anything that had ever passed her lips. She threw herself into his arms. People on the sidewalk stopped walking. Nurses at the windows pressed their faces to the glass. Even strangers could tell something huge had just happened. The doctor stared at the little plug in the poor girl's hand, his mind racing. His training, his years of experience, every test he had ever read, they all screamed that this was impossible. How could every scan have missed something so simple? How could every specialist have said no blockage, when there had clearly been something in that ear? Took it from Kayla with shaking fingers and held it up to the light. This is not normal," he said. "This looks like it was made." He turned it over and over, eyes narrowing. There were tiny scratches on one side, like it had been pushed in and pulled at many times over the years. "This would have blocked almost all sound," he said slowly. "It sits deep against the drum. If there was one in the other ear too." His voice trailed off. Rachel grabbed his arm. "Check," she demanded. "Right now, please." He nodded and took out a small light from his pocket. Ella trembled in her father's arms, but she let the doctor lean closer. He shone the light into her other ear, carefully looking deep. His whole body went still. His face went white. "There is another one," he whispered. Rage and horror rose in Daniel at the same time. "Take it out," he snapped. "Right now, take it out." The doctor swallowed. "We should do this inside in a clean room," he said. "There could be risk of," but Daniel's eyes were wild. "You said there was no blockage," he growled. "For 7 years, you all said that, and now a little girl from the street can see what you could not. Take it out." Kayla stepped back, hugging the empty bottle bag to her chest. She suddenly felt very small. She had done something huge, and now it was out of her hands. Part of her wanted to run, to go back to her simple life where rich people's pain did not crash into her own. Another part of her could not move, still locked on the image of that little plug in the doctor's hand. The doctor nodded, finally understanding that he had no choice. He waved to a nurse at the door. "Prepare a room, we need to remove a foreign object from the ear canal. Notify the ENT team," he said, his voice clipped and tight. As they rushed inside, Daniel turned back to Kayla. For a moment, all the walls he had built between himself and the world fell away. He saw her broken sandals, her thin arms, the plastic bag in her hands. He saw the fear in her eyes and the stubborn courage that had kept her standing when everyone else told her to move. He opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? How do you thank someone who just gave your child the world of sound? Rachel stepped forward instead. She grabbed the little girl's hands and squeezed them. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Kayla looked down, shy, muttered, "I just saw it," and tried to pull away. She was not used to rich people touching her like that, but Rachel held on tight as if letting go would make all of this fade like a dream. Inside the hospital, chaos began to build. Nurses ran, doors opened. A file was pulled from a cabinet, pages flipped, tests reread. Someone called the head of the department. Someone else searched the old notes, trying to understand how they had all missed this. In a small waiting room, Kayla sat on a plastic chair, her legs swinging. Her mother had finally found her and stood beside her, scolding her in a whisper for walking off, then going quiet when she heard what had happened. Now she gripped her daughter's shoulders, torn between pride and fear. "You should not have touched," she said, but then her voice softened. "But you helped her." On the other side of a thick door, the doctor and his team worked on Ella's other ear. They used real tools this time, real lights, real skill. The second plug was harder to remove. It had been there longer, pressed deeper. When it finally slid free, slightly larger than the first, everyone in the room stared at it in silence. Two small pieces of plastic and foam, shaped just so, dark from years inside. Two little secrets that had stolen 7 years of sound from a child's life. "This did not happen by accident," the doctor said quietly. "This was placed." Word "placed" hung in the air like smoke. Outside, Daniel paced the floor. His mind raced through memories. Nurses in the nursery, doctors in white coats. The first nanny they had hired and later let go when she said the job was too heavy. The new one, the night shift, the times he and his wife slept while someone else watched their baby. A sick, ugly thought formed in his mind. What if this was not a mistake? What if someone had done this on purpose? His stomach rolled. His hands curled into fists. The door opened. The doctor stepped out, holding a small metal tray with both plugs sitting on a white cloth. He looked older than he had that morning. "She is resting now," he said. "Her hearing will not be perfect right away. The brain has to learn, but she will hear. With support, she can live a normal life." Rachel burst into fresh tears, covering her face. Daniel felt his knees go weak. Relief flooded him, so strong it almost hurt. But then the doctor lifted the tray a little higher. "We need to talk about these," he said. "These are not things a child could push deep inside on her own. Not at that age. These do not match any medical device we use. They look like they were cut by hand. We will send them to the lab. We will also check the old records, the first scans, the notes. Someone made a very big mistake, or he hesitated, then finished, or someone did this intentionally." The word intentionally hit Daniel like fire. Faces flashed in his mind. People he trusted in his house. People who had held his baby. People who had access to her every day and night. The nanny's calm smile. The way one nurse had always looked at the expensive things in the nursery. The business partners who had said, "A deaf child is still a blessing," but with eyes that flicked to his company shares. If someone had planned this, it would mean one terrible thing. The life his child had lived in silence was not just sad, it was stolen. From the waiting room chairs, Kayla watched as the doctor carried the tray down the hall. She did not know yet that those two tiny pieces would tear open long-buried secrets, shake a powerful family, and pull her own life into a storm she never asked for. The next hours moved like a movie, in slow motion and fast forward at the same time. And for everyone in that hospital, nothing felt normal anymore. Because once you see two tiny pieces of plastic that stole 7 years of sound from a child, you cannot go back to pretending it was just bad luck. As the doctor carried the tray with the plugs down the hall, Daniel followed close behind, his eyes locked on the little objects like they were alive. Rachel walked beside him, still shaking, one hand pressed to her chest as if she was trying to hold her heart in place. Behind them, a nurse pushed Ella's stretcher toward a recovery room, and every few seconds the little girl flinched at a new sound: the squeak of wheels, the buzz of a light, the beep of a monitor. She clung to a small stuffed bunny and kept her eyes wide open, scared that if she blinked, the sounds might disappear again. In the waiting area, Kayla sat on the same plastic chair, swinging her legs and holding her mother's hand so tight her fingers hurt. Her mother, whose name was Lena, kept looking at the rich family and then at her daughter with a mix of fear and pride that she didn't know how to hide. She had spent years cleaning clinics and watching doctors walk past her like she was invisible, and now her little girl had done something that none of them had noticed. It did not feel real. A nurse came out and called Daniel and Rachel into a small conference room with glass walls. They went in like people walking into a courtroom, shoulders stiff, faces pale. The doctor set the tray down on the table between them and sat opposite, his hands folded like he was afraid to touch anything else. "We removed both pieces," he said in a low voice. "Your daughter will need time and therapy, but she can hear. We tested her responses, there is no doubt." Rachel's eyes filled with fresh tears and she reached for Daniel's hand under the table. For a moment, pure joy pushed through the fear. Their girl, their quiet little girl who had lived in her own silent world, would hear music, voices, rain on the roof. But the joy lasted only a few heartbeats before the doctor's face darkened. He picked up one of the plugs with a pair of tweezers and turned it toward them. "I have worked with children for 20 years, he said. "I have seen many strange things in ears, beads, beans, bits of cotton, but I have never seen something like this. This is shaped to fit deep in the canal. It is made of a mix of plastic and foam. It is not a medical device. It is not something a baby could push in alone, especially not at a newborn age." He paused, then added, "We checked your daughter's first hearing test notes. There is a record that her ears were clear, no mention of foreign objects. But the scans from that time are missing from the digital file. Only a written summary remains. That is unusual." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Missing," he repeated, his voice sharp. "How can scans be missing?" The doctor swallowed. "We are looking into it. It could be a simple error, old systems, storage problems. But when I see these," he set the plug back down and it made a tiny tap against the metal tray that sounded loud in the quiet room, "I start to wonder if someone changed something." Rachel's stomach twisted. "Are you saying someone did this to her on purpose?" she whispered. Saying the words out loud made her feel like she might throw up. The doctor hesitated, choosing each word slowly. "I am saying this does not look like an accident," he said. "We have to involve the hospital administration. They may call the police. There will be questions about who had access to your daughter when she was born, nurses, staff. Maybe even people outside the hospital if someone visited and was alone with her." Faces rushed through Rachel's mind like a fast slideshow. Nurses saying, "Congratulations," friends bringing flowers, family members holding the baby. The nanny they had hired after a few weeks, the one who had seemed so gentle and careful. She remembered how the nanny had sometimes taken the baby out of the room to let you rest, and how she and Daniel had been too exhausted to think twice. A cold shiver went through her. "What about her nanny?" she asked softly. "She has been with us since the beginning." The doctor made a note on a paper. "We will need a full list of everyone who cared for your daughter in the first months," he said, "at home and here. We will also pull the old visitor logs for the maternity ward. I know this is hard, but we must treat this like a serious case. Someone stole years from your child. That is not something we can ignore." Daniel stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "I want this investigated," he snapped. "I don't care how much it costs. Find out who did this. I want names. I want to know who thought they had the right to play with my child's life." His voice shook at the end, and the anger in his eyes was not just rage, it was guilt mixed with it, a heavy, choking kind that whispered, "You should have protected her. You should have known." When they left the room, the hospital administrator, a tall man in a gray suit, was already waiting with a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. He shook Daniel's hand firmly and promised a full internal review, but his gaze kept flicking to the plugs on the tray with something like fear. Hospitals did not like stories like this. Stories like this became news, and news could destroy trust. Outside in the waiting area, Kayla watched all of this through the glass, not hearing the words but reading the adults' faces. She saw fear, anger, shock, shame. She saw the rich man's fists clench and unclench, saw the woman's shoulders shake as she cried, saw the doctor look small and unsure for the first time. She also saw something else, people staring at her and her mother with different eyes now. A nurse walked over with 2 small cups of juice. "For you," she said, forcing a smile. "You did something very brave." Ayla took the cup slowly. "Will she be okay?" she asked. The nurse nodded. "She will hear now," she said, "because of you." The words landed on Kayla like a warm blanket and a heavy stone at the same time. Because of you, she had changed a stranger's life with 2 trembling fingers. She had also opened a door to something dark that she did not fully understand. Lena squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "When they are done we should go," she whispered. This is rich people's trouble. We do not belong in the middle. Kayla wanted to agree, but when she thought about the way Ella had looked at her, trusting and scared and hopeful all at once, she wasn't sure leaving was the right thing. A few hours later, Ella was moved to a private room with pale blue walls and a window that showed a slice of city sky. She lay in bed, eyes still wide with every new sound, turning her head toward noises like a puppy hearing the world for the first time. When Rachel whispered close to her ear, she flinched but smiled. When Daniel laughed, she laughed too, not because she understood the joke but because the deep sound made her feel safe. The first time the door creaked open, though, she covered her ears and winced. It was all too much too fast. A young audiologist came in, a woman named Nora with gentle hands and soft brown hair tied back. She spoke slowly, explaining that they would help Ella learn how to understand what she was hearing. Her brain has had 7 years without sound, she told the parents. We need to take it step by step, simple words, simple noises. She may be scared at first, that is normal. She handed Ella a little toy that made a soft chime when you pressed it. Ella pressed it once, jumped at the sound, then pressed it again and again, eyes shining with wonder. Daniel watched, his throat tight. It was the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. When there was a quiet moment, he turned to the door and gestured for Lena and Kayla to come in. They had been waiting in the hall, unsure if they had a place in that room full of expensive machines and whispered prayers. Please, he said, his voice softer now. You need to see this. Kayla stepped inside, her eyes drawn straight to the little girl in the bed. Ella saw her and sat up a little, clutching the toy. She pointed at her own ear, then at Kayla, then made a small shape with her hands that meant you in the sign language she knew. It was not perfect, but the meaning was clear. You did this. Kayla smiled, shy and proud, and walked closer. For the first time, she spoke loud enough for Ella to hear. Hi, she said. The sound was gentle, not sharp. Ella's eyes widened in surprise. Hi, she repeated, the word shaky on her tongue. Everyone in the room felt the weight of that tiny exchange. Daniel cleared his throat. My name is Daniel, he told Lena and Kayla. This is my wife Rachel, and this is our daughter Ella. I do not know how to say thank you in a way that is big enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black card, the kind that could open almost any door in the city. I own Hayes Development, he said, as if they didn't already recognize him from billboards and magazines. If you ever need anything, help, a job, a place to live, anything at all, you come to me. You changed my child's life. Lena's cheeks flushed. She wiped her palms on her old skirt before taking the card with trembling fingers. We didn't do it for money, she said quickly. My daughter she just saw something. Daniel nodded. I know, he said. That is what makes it mean even more. Rachel stepped forward and hugged both of them at once, something she would never have done years before. All the walls that had separated rich and poor felt thin right now, like paper that had gotten wet. But as warm as the moment was inside that room, outside in the hallway, something colder was growing. 2 men in dark suits with badges clipped to their belts arrived at the nurse's station and began asking quiet questions. They were detectives called in by the hospital director after the lab's first quick report came back. The report said the same thing the doctor had guessed. The plugs were not medical devices, not part of any approved treatment. They were hand-cut, custom-shaped, and had fibers on them that matched old cotton like the kind used in older-style nursing pads. They also showed signs of being forced against the eardrum many times. Someone had put them there with purpose and had likely adjusted them at least once. When the detectives entered the room to talk to the family, the air changed. Even Ella, who was still learning what sounds meant, sensed that the deep voices and careful words were different from the gentle ones before. One detective, a man named Lucas with tired eyes and a notepad, asked them to go over the first weeks of Ella's life in detail. Who had visited the hospital? Who had held the baby? Was there anyone who seemed too interested, too close, too eager to be alone with her? At first, everything was a blur for Daniel and Rachel. Sleep-deprived memories, hospital corridors, flowers, beeping machines. Then some images started to sharpen. Rachel remembered a nurse with bright red lipstick who had always smelled like strong perfume and had clicked her tongue in pity when she thought the parents weren't looking. She said deaf children have harder lives, Rachel whispered. She said it twice. I thought she was just being rude. Daniel remembered a business partner who had visited with a fake smile and too many questions about the baby's health, asking quietly if any problems might affect future plans. He remembered brushing it off at the time, but now the memory stung. They gave the detectives names, dates, whatever they could. The detectives also asked about the nanny. We understand you hired someone to help at home when your daughter was born, Lucas said. Is she still with you? Yes, Daniel said. Her name is Miss Turner. She has been with us for 7 years. She loves Ella. She learned sign language before any of the staff. She has never hurt her. But even as he spoke, a small, doubting voice whispered at the back of his mind, what if you don't know her as well as you think? The detective made another note. We will want to speak with her, he said, and with everyone else in your household who had access to your daughter's room. While the adults talked, Ella watched their faces and tried to match the new sounds she was hearing to their expressions. Some sounds were sharp and made her nervous. Others were warm and made her feel safe. Kayla sat in the corner with her juice, feeling smaller and smaller as the room filled with big people and bigger problems. She tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "are we in trouble?" Lena shook her head firmly. "No," she said, "you helped. After they ask their questions, we will go home. This is not our fight." But that night, when they finally left the hospital and walked back toward their tiny apartment, the city felt different. People rushed past as always, cars honked, vendors shouted. But everywhere Kayla looked, she saw ears plug secrets. She could not stop thinking about the idea that someone would want a child to be deaf on purpose. She tried to imagine who would ever do such a thing and why. Back in the Hayes mansion, the news of Ella's hearing spread through the staff like a shock wave. The cook cried in the pantry. The driver wiped his eyes when no one was looking. The housekeeper clapped her hands and whispered a prayer of thanks. Only one person did not smile right away. Miss Turner stood very still at the base of the stairs, holding a folded blanket to her chest as Daniel and Rachel came in with Ella between them. The little girl flinched at the sound of the big wooden door closing, then giggled when the family dog barked, the noise making her jump and laugh at the same time. "She heard him," Rachel whispered to the nanny. "She hears us. There were things in her ears. Someone put them there." It was the first time she had said it out loud in the house, and the words hung heavy in the air. Miss Turner's face went pale. The blanket slipped from her hands to the floor. What do you mean someone put them there?" she asked slowly. Her voice was calm, but her fingers trembled. Daniel watched her closely. "Exactly what I said," he replied. "Two pieces of plastic and foam, custom made. They believe they were placed when she was very small, maybe as a newborn. They say it looked deliberate." The nanny's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth with one hand and sank back against the wall. "No," she whispered. "Oh no, that's not possible. She was just a baby." She slid down until she was sitting on the steps, staring at nothing. For a second, Rachel felt sorry for her. This woman had bathed their child, held her when she cried, rocked her to sleep on nights when Rachel's own arms had felt too tired to move. Seeing her so shaken felt wrong. But then another thought crept in. If someone in this house had been part of it, wouldn't they act shocked too? Wouldn't they want to look innocent? She pushed the thought away, hating herself for even thinking it, but it stayed in the corner of her mind like a shadow that wouldn't leave. The next day, the detectives came to the mansion. They walked through the halls, their eyes catching every camera in the corners, every door with a lock. They asked to see old security footage from 7 years ago. The head of security, a stocky man named James with a serious face, scratched his head. "We change systems every few years," he said, "but we do keep archived videos for legal reasons. I will check." He led them down to a small room near the garage where black boxes hummed quietly on metal shelves. Dust motes floated in the air. He pulled out a labeled drive and hooked it up to a monitor. Grainy footage flickered to life. They watched scenes from the night Ella first came home, the car pulling up, Rachel crying and laughing at the same time, Daniel carrying the tiny baby in a white blanket up the steps, staff clapping, balloons bouncing. Everything looked normal, almost perfect. They sped through days and nights in fast motion. In most clips, Miss Turner could be seen holding the baby, feeding her, changing her, humming songs that the little girl could not hear. There were shots of Rachel sitting in the nursery, falling asleep in the rocking chair with the baby on her chest. Shots of Daniel standing in the doorway late at night, just watching his daughter breathe. Nothing looked evil, nothing looked wrong. Then they reached a clip from a week after the baby came home. The time stamp blinked in the corner. 2:13 a.m. The nursery was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner. The nanny was there, gently rocking the baby. After a few minutes, she put the baby carefully into the crib and left the room, closing the door behind her. The detectives leaned closer, their faces reflected in the screen. For a while the room stayed still. The blanket moved up and down with the baby's breathing. The mobile above the crib spun slowly. Then the door opened again. A figure stepped inside. At first, the camera caught only a shoulder and the back of a head. The person moved quietly, like they did not want anyone to know they were there. The detectives froze the frame and zoomed in, but the old camera made the image fuzzy. The person walked over to the crib and leaned down. For a long moment they stayed bent over the baby, their hands moving near her head. It could have been someone stroking her hair, fixing the blanket, or it could have been something else. In the video, the person's face turned slightly toward the camera, and everyone watching in the small monitor room sucked in a breath. Rachel clutched Daniel's arm so hard her nails dug into his skin. James swore under his breath. Lucas leaned forward, his heart thudding, because the face on the screen looked like someone they all knew very well. It looked like Rachel. Her hair was tied back the same way, her profile the same. The angle of her jaw, the tilt of her head, it all looked like the mother who now stood in that room watching herself on a screen. That can't be me," Rachel whispered, her voice thin with shock. "I don't remember this. I never went in there alone at night without telling someone. I always called the nanny when I was too tired. I would have remembered." Her knees went weak, and she had to grab the back of a chair to stay standing. Daniel stared at the screen, then at his wife, then back at the screen. His mind fought with itself. He knew this woman better than anyone, knew the way she loved their child, knew she would never harm her. And yet the picture did not know their history. The picture just showed a figure leaning over a newborn's head in the middle of the night when no one else was watching. Lucas hit play again. The figure reached into the crib, hands moving near the baby's ears. It was impossible to tell exactly what they were doing. The baby did not cry. The person stayed for maybe 30 seconds, then straightened up and left as quietly as they had come. The door closed. The minutes rolled on. The baby slept in her quiet world. The silence in the security room felt heavier than the air. "Footage can be edited," James said slowly. "This is from an old system. It's possible someone spliced this. Faces can look similar in bad lighting. It might not be her. It might not be real." His words were meant to calm, but they did not erase the image from anyone's mind. Rachel shook her head over and over, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't do this," she choked out. "I would never do this to my baby, you know that, right?" She looked at Daniel with wild, pleading eyes. He opened his mouth, wanting to say yes, to shout it, to wrap his arms around her and promise that he believed her with all his heart. But the fear, the guilt, the anger, the confusion all tangled in his chest. The pause, one tiny deadly pause, was enough to slice her in half. Her jaw dropped. "You don't know," she whispered. "You don't know if you believe me." I just," he stammered, hatting himself. "We have to be sure. We have to look at everything. Someone used that night to hurt her, and we have to know who it was." Rachel stepped back from him like he had slapped her. "You think it could have been me," she said, her voice shaking. "You think I could have stuffed something in our baby's ears and then pretended not to notice for 7 years? You think I could listen to her cry in silence and live with myself?" She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Ms. Turner, who had been standing in the doorway the whole time, watching the footage with a stricken face, rushed to her side. "He doesn't really think that," the nanny said fiercely, glaring at Daniel. "He's scared and angry. People say stupid things when they are scared." The detective cleared his throat. "We are not making accusations yet," Lucas said carefully. "Old footage can lie, time stamps can be wrong, angles can trick the eye. We will have this video examined by experts. We will also compare it to other nights. The point of this is not to break your family. The point is to find out who stole your daughter's hearing. That person could still be close." The word "close" ran through the room like a cold wind, because in that moment every person who had ever loved or cared for Ella suddenly became a possible suspect. A grandparent who didn't want a mixed family, a nurse who hated rich people, a jealous business partner, a nanny with secrets, even a mother on a night she didn't remember. Nothing felt safe. Somewhere across the city, in a tiny apartment with peeling paint and thin walls, Kayla lay on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling while the sounds of her building washed over her. Neighbors arguing, a TV playing too loud, a baby crying in the next room. She had heard these sounds all her life, so much that she almost didn't notice them anymore. But now her mind kept going back to a quiet girl in a rich hospital bed, pressing a toy and laughing at every chime. It wasn't fair, she thought. It wasn't fair that someone so rich could have something so important stolen from her, and it wasn't fair that it took someone so poor to give it back. She turned to her mother. "Do you think they will find out who did it?" she asked. Lena stroked her hair. "Maybe," she said, tired. "Maybe not. People with power can hide many things, but sometimes truth comes out in strange ways." Kayla thought about that long after her mother fell asleep. She didn't know her life was already tied to the Hayes family now, not just because of what she had done, but because of the questions it had raised and the secrets it had exposed. Back at the mansion, the detectives packed up the video drive and the plugs in careful evidence bags. They left with promises to be in touch soon, but promises did not stop the way the house felt different that night. Doors that had always been left open were now closed. Staff who had always joked in the kitchen now spoke in whispers. Eyes that had always looked soft now watched each other with quiet fear. In Ella's room, sound machines played gentle white noise to stop her from being overwhelmed by every little creak and thump. She lay between her parents, one hand on her mother's face, the other on her father's chest, feeling their bodies tremble under her touch. She did not know all the words, but she knew this. Something big and scary was happening, and somehow she was at the center of it. Far away in a lab lit by bright white lights, a technician examined the plugs under a microscope. He saw tiny fibers clinging to them, not from the ear but from fingers that had held them long ago. He saw small marks along the sides like they had been trimmed and fitted. He took pictures, wrote notes, and then paused when he noticed something odd. On the flat edge of one plug, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a faint, shallow scratch in the shape of a letter. He looked closer. It could have been an accident, it could have been nothing. But to his trained eyes it looked like someone had started to carve an initial and then stopped. He zoomed in and saved the image. Tomorrow he would send his report to the detectives. But when they saw that mark and matched it to a name that had been in the Hayes house from the very beginning, another piece of this twisted puzzle would fall into place. And the truth about who wanted Ella to live in silence would cut deeper than anyone was ready for. The next morning started with hope and ended with something close to a nightmare. And if you had walked into the Hayes mansion just after sunrise, you would have thought it was a happy house again, because for a few quiet hours they all tried to pretend that life was simple and nothing evil had ever touched their little girl. Sunlight poured through the tall windows and painted soft shapes on the floors. In the kitchen, the cook hummed a song under her breath as she flipped pancakes, forgetting for a moment that the child upstairs had never heard music before yesterday. In Ella's room, birds chirped outside the window, and for the first time in her life she turned toward the sound on her own, eyes wide, mouth forming a perfect O of wonder. "Do you hear that?" Rachel whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed, tears already in her eyes. "Those are birds, they're singing." The little girl listened, her hand on her mother's arm, and then gave a small, shaky laugh that sounded like bells in a room that had only known silence. Daniel stood at the doorway, leaning against the frame, his tie still loose around his neck because he had not gone to the office, could not bear to miss a single one of these firsts. Every sound she heard felt like a tiny miracle, and part of him wanted to freeze time and stay in this bubble of joy forever. But life does not stop for miracles, and darkness does not stay away just because you have had one good day. Down in a lab across town, the technician who had found the scratched letter on the plug finished his report and sent it to the detectives, along with a magnified image that made the mark clear. It was not a full name, not even a full letter, more like the top half of one, but to the human mind, half shapes still look like something. The shallow scratch could have been an L, a T, maybe even part of an R, but when the detectives saw it, their thoughts ran to the list of names connected to the case, and one name stood out: Turner, the nanny who had been with Ella from the beginning, a woman who had access to the child day and night, a woman whose last name began with the letter carved in a thing that had stolen 7 years of sound. It was not proof, not at all, but in their world, small clues start big storms. While the Hayes family ate breakfast together for the first time in months, the detectives sat in their office, coffee cups untouched, going over everything again. Lucas tapped the table with his pen. "We have missing scans from the hospital file, unapproved devices in the child's ears, security footage from the house that could be fake, and now a plug with a scratch that looks like part of a T," he said. "Either we are dealing with a clumsy monster or someone who is very good at moving in the dark and made one small mistake." His partner, a woman named Dana with steady eyes, flipped through pages. "The mother story has no holes so far," she said. "Her timeline matches the records, her behavior fits a shocked parent, not a guilty one trying to cover up. I watched her face when she saw that video of herself in the nursery. That was not acting. If something is wrong with that footage, it might be edited or it might not be her at all." Lucas nodded slowly. "So if that video is not real, someone made it to look like her," he said. "Who had access to the security system 7 years ago." Dana checked another page. "Head of security, of course, the tech company they used back then. And the nanny, Ms. Turner, was the one who stayed up during night shifts with the baby most often. She would know where the cameras were. She might have seen things that others missed, or she might have done things when others were sleeping." The room went quiet. Finally, Lucas sighed. "We can't arrest a woman because her name starts with T and she worked nights," he said. "But we can ask harder questions, look deeper, push a little more. And we need to know something else too." He looked at the report and tapped a line with his finger. "The lab found old cot fibers on the plugs, the kind used in hospital nursing pads years ago. If the plugs were made from that material, it suggests they were built in or near a hospital. Who worked in both a hospital and the Hayes house?" Dana's finger slid to a name they had not paid enough attention to before. "According to the background check, Ms. Turner used to be a nurse's aide in the same hospital where Ella was born," she said quietly. "She left that job about a month before the baby came home. Official reason, stress, but it means she knew the layout, she knew the staff. She had access to medical supplies." Lucas leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "So our gentle, quiet nanny used to work in the same place where the first scans went missing and the baby was first marked as deaf," he said. "And now she lives in the house and has the trust of the family. Either that is the biggest coincidence of the year or we are walking right past the answer." While the detectives circled her name on their paperwork, Miss Turner was upstairs in the mansion, kneeling on the floor next to Ella's toys. She was helping the little girl sort blocks, tapping each one on the ground to see if the new sound would delight her, and each time Ella giggled, the nanny's eyes shone with wet light. She loved this child like she was her own, or at least that was the story she told herself every night. But love can live in the same heart as fear, and fear can make people do strange, secret things. As she watched Ella, Miss Turner's fingers brushed the small silver bracelet on her wrist. It was old and a little scratched, with a tiny charm shaped like a drop of water. Only one person had ever known the real story behind that bracelet, and he was not alive anymore. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering a hospital room years before, a different baby, a different mother, and a mistake that had destroyed her life. She had promised herself she would never let a child be hurt like that again. She had promised herself she would never let her past touch her work, but promises like plugs can have hidden edges. A knock on the doorframe made her jump. Daniel stood there, his expression unreadable. "The detectives are coming back this afternoon," he said. "They want to speak with you again here in the house." Ms. Turner forced a smile. "Of course," she replied, "anything to help. I want them to find who did this to her." Daniel watched her carefully. "You used to work at the hospital, didn't you?" he asked. The question was casual, but his eyes were not. "Yes," she said slowly, fingers on the bracelet again. "Years ago, I left before Ella was born. I wanted something quieter." "You never told us it was the same place," he said. His voice was soft, but there was a sharp line under the softness. She swallowed. "I didn't think it mattered," she said. "I have worked in many places. I wanted to be a nanny, not a nurse anymore, that is all." He studied her face for a long moment, then turned his attention to Ella. "Come downstairs when you have a moment," he said. "We need to talk as a family." The word family made her chest ache, because for 7 years she had told herself that this house was her family too. She had given up her own small life to be part of this bigger one. She had missed holidays with her relatives, birthdays, even her mother's funeral because Ella needed her. Now in one day everything felt fragile. Somewhere else in the city, in a classroom with cracked windows and squeaky chairs, Kayla sat at a wooden desk that still had someone else's name carved into it from years before. The teacher wrote math problems on the board and the other kids sighed and pulled out their notebooks, but Kayla's mind was not on numbers. It was in a rich house with glass walls. It was in a hospital room where a girl her age had heard the word mom for the first time. She doodled tiny ears and plugs in the margin of her paper, then quickly crossed them out when the teacher walked past. At lunch, a boy who followed gossip more than schoolwork nudged her with his elbow. "I heard something on the bus," he said. "People were talking about a rich man whose kid was deaf and then suddenly could hear. They said a random girl from the street fixed her. You know anything about that?" Kayla froze, her sandwich halfway to her mouth. "No," she said quickly, looking away. "Sounds like a story from TV." The boy shrugged and moved on to another friend already bored. But his words stuck in her head. If people on the bus were talking, how long before everyone knew? How long before people looked at her as that girl, not Kayla, the quiet kid who sat near the window? Part of her liked the idea of being known for something good. Another part of her was scared because stories can be twisted, and poor families do not always come out clean when rich trouble is involved. Back at the Hayes house, the detectives arrived just after lunch. The sky had turned gray, clouds gathering like they could feel the tension in the air. They sat down with the family in the sitting room, where soft chairs and a polished coffee table could not make the talk feel less heavy. Ms. Turner sat on the edge of a chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The cook brought tea and then disappeared quickly, not wanting to hear anything that might make her lie awake later. "Thank you for meeting with us again," Lucas began. His voice was polite but firm. "We have some follow-up questions. We also have new information from the lab." Rachel reached for Daniel's hand, and this time he did not pull away. The tiny gap from the night before still hurt, but the fear of losing each other was worse. They sat close, like they were trying to remind themselves they were on the same side. "We will answer anything," Daniel said. "Just tell us what you know." Lucas pulled out a folder and spread a few photos on the table. They were close-up shots of the plugs, white and gray against a blue background. In one photo, the small scratch shape was clear. "The lab confirmed these were handmade," he said. "Cut from layers of older cotton and plastic, pressed together, then shaped to fit a small ear canal. There are tiny marks that show they were adjusted after being placed, like someone pushed them further in at least once." Ms. Turner's face went whiter with every word. She stared at the photos with horror. "Why would anyone do that?" she whispered. "Why would anyone want a child to live in silence?" Dana answered, this time her tone careful. "Sometimes people hurt children to hurt their parents," she said. "Sometimes they think making a child special will make the parent more dependent, easier to control. Sometimes they want to punish or take revenge or even get sympathy. We do not know the reason yet." "We will find it." The detectives then turned to the nanny. "Miss Turner," Lucas said, "we learned that you worked as a nurse's aide in the hospital where Ella was born. Can you tell us more about what you did there?" She licked her lips, clearly nervous, but forced herself to speak. "I worked on the maternity floor," she said. "I changed sheets, helped the nurses, brought bobbies to their mothers. I loved the bobbies. They were the only part that made the job good." "Did you ever handle medical supplies?" Dana asked. "Cotton pads, small tools." "Sometimes," she said. "We all did. If a nurse was busy, she would tell me to grab things from the supply room, but I was not allowed to do anything serious. I never did tests or procedures." Lucas nodded slowly. "Can you think of any reason your name or part of it would be scratched into something used in an ear?" he asked, sliding the photo of the scratch plug closer. Her eyes widened. She leaned in, squinting, then shook her head so fast her hair moved. "No," she said. "I have never seen that thing before. Why would my name be on it? That makes no sense. I would never ever hurt a child. You have to believe me." Rachel looked at her, and for a moment her heart pulled in two directions. This woman had stayed up nights when Rachel was too exhausted to open her eyes. She had kissed scraped knees, braided hair, read stories in sign language. Could someone who did all that also be the reason her daughter never heard a bedtime song? Her throat tightened. "You should have told us you worked at the hospital," she said softly. "We shared everything with you. You knew all our secrets." Tears spilled down the nanny's cheeks. I was afraid you wouldn't hire me, she admitted. People judge, they think if you work somewhere and something bad happened there, you must be part of it, but I left because something wrong happened, not because I did it. The room went still. Dana leaned forward. What do you mean something wrong happened? She asked. Can you tell us? Ms. Turner gripped her bracelet like it was the only solid thing in the room. Years ago, before you ever knew me, she began, we had a baby on the floor, a little boy. His parents were very rich, not like you but close. There were problems with his breathing. They did tests, many tests. One night, his mother said she heard him crying and no one came. She said we left him too long. She went to the board, made noise, blamed the staff. They needed someone to blame. I was the easiest one. I was in the room once when his monitor beeped and the nurse had not come yet. I called her. We helped. But later, when things went wrong, they said I delayed. They wrote it in my file. I lost my job. They called it neglect. It was not true, but no one listened. After that, I could not find work in a hospital again. That is why I became a nanny. I told myself I would take care of children one by one instead of many at once so nothing bad could ever happen on my watch again. She lifted her eyes, pleading, I would never risk another child. I know what it feels like to be blamed when you tried to help. Lucas watched her silently. Her story explained the fear in her eyes, the way she clung to this house like it was her only safe place. It also showed that she had reason to hate rich families who blame staff for their own pain. Do you remember any names from that time? He asked. The family, the doctors, anyone who might still work at the hospital. She thought for a moment. The father's last name was Blake, she said slowly. The mother. I don't remember. The main doctor was someone from another city. They brought him in because he was famous. His name was Dr. Carr, tall, dark hair, always speaking like he knew everything. He was angry when they blamed me. He said it was not my fault, but he did not fight hard enough. No one did. Dana wrote the names down. They might mean nothing or they might open another door. Why didn't you mention this before? Rachel asked, hurt. Because I wanted to start over, Ms. Turner whispered. I wanted you to see me as who I am now, not as some file in a drawer. If I told you I had been accused of hurting a baby, would you have let me stay near yours? Silence answered her. The truth was they would not have. That hurt too. Before anyone could say more, a sharp chime from the gate's intercom echoed through the room. The sound made Ella, who was playing on the rug, jump and clap her hands over her ears. She was still getting used to loud noises. James, the security chief, glanced at the panel, then frowned. There is someone at the gate asking for you, he said to Daniel. He says his name is Dr. Carr. The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Heads turned, eyes widened. Ms. Turner gasped. He's here, she breathed. Why would he be here? Within minutes, the man himself was in the sitting room. He was older now, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines on his face, but his eyes still had that sharp, confident look of someone who was used to being obeyed. He carried a leather bag and wore a suit that was a little too shiny, like someone trying to look richer than they were. Mr. Hayes, he said smoothly as he shook Daniel's hand. I came as soon as I heard. A colleague at the hospital mentioned the case, and when I saw the details, I realized I had seen something like this before. I thought maybe I could be of help. Lucas and Dana exchanged a glance. This did not feel like a simple, friendly visit. Help how? Daniel asked, his tone guarded. Dr. Carr opened his bag and pulled out a thin folder. Years ago when I was consulting at your hospital, there was a series of strange cases, he said. Children with ear problems that did not make sense, hearing loss with no clear cause. It happened 3 times in 1 year. The last time, a baby boy, the parents made a lot of noise. They needed someone to blame. They chose a nurse's aide. His eyes flicked toward Ms. Turner for a second, then away. After that, we looked deeper. We found something. Rachel leaned forward. What did you find? She asked. He laid 3 grainy photos on the table. They showed tiny plugs, much like the ones from Ella's ears, but rougher. These, he said, we found them in a hospital trash bin near the staff lockers. Someone had been making them and then throwing away failed ones. By the time we found them, the children had already been marked as deaf or had passed away from other issues. We couldn't prove anything, but I had a theory. His voice dropped. Someone on staff was sabotaging certain patients. The room spun for a moment. Sabotaging. It was a word that did not belong in the same sentence as Bobby's. Why did you not report this? Dana asked quietly, anger under her calm tone. Carr spread his hands in a helpless gesture. We did an internal review, he said. We looked at staff logs, everything. The hospital board told me to stay quiet until they had more proof. Then the story cooled down, people moved on, and my contract ended. I pushed for answers, but they said I was causing trouble. I left. I regret not doing more. That is why I am here now. When I heard about your daughter and the plugs, I knew the pattern had returned. I know you have detectives on this, but I thought my old notes might help. Lucas studied the doctor, trying to read the truth in his face. Was he helping out of guilt or trying to control the story again? Do you have any idea who on staff could have done it? He asked. Carr hesitated. I had suspicions, he admitted. One nurse in particular. She worked nights, had access to the bobbies, and always seemed to be around when something went wrong. She disappeared right after the last case. Resigned suddenly, no forwarding address. Her name was Rita Blake. The name hit 2 people at once. Ms. Turner jerked like she had been shocked. Blake, she repeated. That was the name of the family with the baby boy. Are you saying the mother worked there too? Carr nodded. Not the mother, he said. Her sister. She used her maiden name at work. She seemed to hate the rich patients, always complaining about how they treated staff. A picture began to form, ugly and crooked. A woman with a grudge, working nights, moving between bobbies whose parents had more money than she would ever see. Tiny hands and tiny ears. Quiet revenge no one could see until it was too late. "So you think this Rita person could have come back and done this to our daughter?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "Why, we never met her." Carr lifted one shoulder. "Old anger can attach itself to new targets," he said. "If she hated rich families, she could have chosen your child to make a point. Or—" He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. "Or she had help from someone inside." The room bristled with tension. Once again every eye turned toward the nanny, who looked like she might faint. "No," she whispered. "I did not help anyone. I did not know she did those things. I only heard rumors after I left. If I had known, I would have told." Who? Carr cut in sharply. "The same board that threw you out to protect their name. Let's not pretend any of us were brave enough back then." His words were meant to spread the guilt around, but they only made the air heavier. The detectives took the new photos, the notes, the names. They promised to track down any record of Rita Blake and her movements over the last 7 years. Maybe she had changed her name. Maybe she had left the country. Maybe she was closer than anyone guessed. For now there were more questions than answers. As the adults argued and searched for someone to blame, one small person in the room saw something no one else noticed. While everyone was looking at Dr. Carr and the detectives, Ella's eyes were on James, the security chief. He stood near the door, arms crossed, face stiff, watching everything like a guard dog who did not like strangers near his fence. When the video from the old security footage had played the night before, he had been right there too, controlling the machine. He had said words about old systems and possible edits. Now, as Carr talked about someone changing records and hiding proof, James's jaw tightened and a tiny muscle jumped near his temple. Ella followed that little movement with her eyes. She did not know much about adult lies, but she had spent years reading faces and hands because she could not hear voices. Sometimes she understood more than the adults thought. As sound slowly joined her world, her eyes still did most of the listening. Later that afternoon, when the house was full of echoing phone calls and rushed footsteps, she wandered down the hallway toward the small room near the garage where the screens and black boxes lived. The door was open a crack. She pushed it wider and peeked in. James was inside alone, his back to the door. On the screen in front of him, the old video of the nursery played again, but this time it looked different. Lines of code ran along the side. He clicked and dragged things with his mouse, layering one picture over another. For a second, the face of the woman leaning over the crib changed. It flickered between two images, one that looked like Rachel and another that looked more like someone else with similar hair and build. The second face was less clear, as if it had been cut and pasted from another clip. Ella's new ears caught the faint click of keys, the low hum of the machine. Her heart beat faster. She stepped away from the door, suddenly scared, and bumped into a side table. A picture frame rattled, making a sharp sound in the quiet hall. James whipped around. "Who's there?" he snapped, then relaxed a little when he saw it was only her. "You scared me, kiddo." He came to the door, forcing his face into a smile. "You're not supposed to be in this area, okay? Lots of wires. You could get hurt." She watched his mouth and picked up some of the words, but not all. Her fingers moved in a sign that meant sorry. He patted her shoulder a little too hard and sent her back toward the stairs. As she walked away, she glanced back and saw him close the door completely, this time locking it with a soft click. Her stomach twisted. Something was wrong. That night, the news finally broke. Someone at the hospital had talked to someone at a newspaper, and by evening headlines glowed on phone screens and TV tickers. "Billionaire's deaf daughter can hear after mysterious discovery. Possible hospital sabotage in children's ear cases. Unknown girl from street saves heiress." Kayla saw the story on a small TV in the tiny store under her building. Her photo was not there, thank God, but the words "girl from poor neighborhood" and "random child" made her heart race. The shop owner turned the volume up, and for the first time she heard a reporter say Ella's name out loud, along with her father's and the name of his company. "They're talking about you," Lena whispered, pulling her away from the screen. "We need to be careful, people might come asking questions." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Kayla argued. "I helped." "Sometimes helping makes people angry," her mother said softly. "Rich people do not always like it when poor people pull the curtain back on their lives." She was right. Within hours, reporters were at the hospital, at the mansion gate, even near the school Kayla attended. Some wanted to praise, some wanted to blame, all wanted a story. At the mansion, Daniel stood at a window watching camera flashes outside the gates. He hated them, hated the way they turned his daughter's pain into a show. Inside the house, the detective spoke quietly with him and Rachel. "You will get calls," Dana warned. "Lawyers, reporters, maybe even other families who think they were hurt by the same person. For now, say as little as possible. We need to do our work without the whole city trying to solve this like a game." "And my daughter?" Rachel asked, rubbing her temples. "She just started hearing and now the whole world is shouting." "We will arrange protection," Lucas said. "And we will dig into every name we have. The old nurse, the doctor, the nanny's file, the security records. Someone left a trail, they always do." Just when they thought the day could not get more complicated, the doorbell rang again. This time it was not a detective or a doctor or a reporter. It was someone no one expected, a lawyer representing one of Daniel's closest business partners, a man named Carlton Blake. The last name hit Daniel like another punch. Blake. Same as the family from Ms. Turner's story. Same as the nurse Rita's family. The lawyer handed Daniel a thick envelope. "Mr. Blake is very sorry for what your family is going through," he said smoothly. "But he has become aware that his family name has been mentioned in a police investigation regarding alleged hospital sabotage. He wants to make it very clear that he and his wife had nothing to do with any of this. Also, his voice dropped, becoming even smoother. He wants you to remember your agreement. Daniel's face darkened. What agreement? He asked, though he already knew. The lawyer smiled without warmth. The one where he helped you keep a certain file quiet years ago, he said. The one that could make your company look very bad if people knew you invested in a hospital that covered up child deaths. It would be a shame if that came out now when you are already under so much attention. Unless, of course, you keep his family out of your public statements. Rachel stared at her husband, shock and hurt written all over her face. What file? She demanded. What is he talking about, Daniel? He closed his eyes for a second, feeling the walls close in. Years ago, when he had first heard whispers of strange hospital cases and a nurse being blamed, he had fought to keep the story away from his company's name. He had invested in that hospital. Bad press would have hurt his projects. Carlton had helped push some things under the rug, promised it was all handled. Now the ghost of that choice was back, standing in his hallway with expensive shoes. I thought it was about a simple mistake, Daniel said hoarsely. If I had known it could be connected to this, you would have what? Rachel cut in, tears in her eyes. Done something. You always tell yourself that, but you never want to see the mess under your own feet. The lawyer cleared his throat. My client only asks that you avoid saying anything that might connect his family to this case in public, he said. He's prepared to support you quietly with any costs, legal or medical, as friends. The word friends tasted like poison. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Part of him wanted to punch the man in the face. Another part knew he was trapped. If the old file came out, people would ask why he had stayed quiet. They might say he cared more about money than children. And deep down, the truth did not feel very different. In the corner of the room, Ella stood by the door listening. She did not understand contracts or news or history, but she understood tone. She heard the lawyer's silky voice and her mother's angry one and her father's broken one, and her chest hurt. She also remembered the way James had closed the security room door and how the picture on the screen had changed. Her new ears took in all these sounds. Her old eyes saw all these cracks. She was a child pulled into a web of adult secrets, and the only person who had touched her without any hidden plan so far was a girl in broken sandals who had just walked past on a normal day. As night fell again, the house was quiet on the outside but full of noise on the inside. Whispered fights, phone calls, the rustle of papers. In a small room near the garage, James deleted a file from a hidden folder with shaking fingers, telling himself he was protecting the family, not hiding evidence. In a cheap apartment across town, Kayla lay awake, staring at the ceiling as thunder rolled in the distance, wondering if she had done the right thing by getting involved. In a detective's office, Lucas stared at the scratched letter photo one more time, then at the list of names on his board: Turner, Blake, Carr, Hayes, James. They were no longer neat words on paper. They were threads in a knot that was pulling tighter by the hour. And in the center of it all, a little girl who had been deaf for 7 years lay in her bed, listening to rain hit the window for the first time. Each drop was a tiny drumbeat, a reminder that sound was hers now, no matter what anyone had tried to take from her. She did not know that before the storm passed, someone in her circle would be dragged away in handcuffs, someone else would disappear, and the poor girl who saved her would have to choose between telling the truth and keeping her own family safe. The storm finally broke the next morning, not in the sky but inside people. Because all the secrets that had been sitting in dark corners of this story began to move toward the light whether anyone was ready or not. And it started with two little girls who had never asked to be part of any of this but were now right in the center. At the Hayes mansion, dawn slipped in through tall windows and painted soft light across the floors, and for a little while the house tried to act normal again. In the kitchen, the cook poured batter on a hot pan, and the sound of it sizzling made Ella jump and then laugh because it was new, because even something as simple as breakfast was now a whole new world for her ears. And upstairs in her room, she stood barefoot by the window listening to the birds outside, her lips moving around the word bird like she was tasting it, one hand resting on the glass. The other pressed against her chest because she could feel the vibrations of the city under her fingers and inside her body at the same time. Rachel watched her and tried not to cry, but tears slipped out anyway, and she kept signing and speaking softly. That's a car, that's the dog, that's the kettle, letting every tiny sound become a miracle, while Daniel stood in the doorway with his tie hanging loose, phone buzzing on the nightstand with messages from lawyers and partners that he ignored because right now all that mattered was the way his daughter's eyes widened every time she heard something new. If the story had ended there, it would have been perfect, just a rich man finally seeing that the best thing in his life was something he could never buy. But life does not stop when you want it to, and the truth has a way of knocking on doors even when they are locked. Across the city in a crowded building with thin walls, Kayla woke up to the sound of her mother's old radio playing the news. And for once she really listened, because the voice coming through the speakers was talking about a billionaire's deaf daughter who now could hear and about a brave young girl from a poor neighborhood. who had pulled something out of the child's ear when experts had missed it. They did not say her name, but the way they described the scene, the hospital bench, the broken sandals, the plastic bag of bottles, made her stomach twist because she knew they were talking about her. And while part of her felt proud, another part felt like someone had taken her inside life and hung it up for strangers to point at. Her mother turned the radio down and looked at her carefully. "They will come today," Lena said quietly. "The police, maybe the rich family, maybe reporters. When they ask you what happened, you tell the truth. No extra words, no stories, just what you saw and what you did. And if anyone tries to make you feel small, remember this: you are not the one who did anything wrong." A knock came sooner than they expected. It was not reporters. It was a police car and a black sedan from the Hayes house, both parked outside the cracked sidewalk like they did not belong in that street at all. The detectives stepped out, tired but gentle, and behind them stood a woman from the Hayes staff with a worried smile. "We wanted to bring you in safely," she said to Lena. "There are cameras outside the hospital now. It will be easier this way." Sitting in the back of the black car, Kayla pressed her fingers into the seat and watched the city flash past, her mind replaying the moment her fingers had touched the strange thing in Ella's ear, the feeling of it sliding free, the way the rich girl had gasped when sound exploded into her world. She did not know that the words she would say today would decide who went to prison and who walked free. At the station, the detectives led them into a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a recording device that blinked a little red light. "We're just going to talk," Dana said softly. "We need to know everything you saw there, okay? You are not in trouble, you helped. We want to make sure nobody twists your story." They asked her to start from the beginning, the walk past the hospital, the way she noticed the rich girl rubbing her ear, how she had seen the tiny edge of something inside, how it had looked smooth and wrong, not like ear. She told them about the first plug, about the way the doctor hadn't believed her until it was in her hand, and she told them about the second plug being removed inside, even though she hadn't seen that part, only heard people talking after. She also told them something that made both detectives sit up straighter. "When the doctor held it up, I saw a little scratch on one side," she said, drawing a small shape on the table with her finger. "Everybody kept saying it looked like a T, but to me it looked crooked, like someone started to make a J and stopped, like when my baby cousin tries to write his name and doesn't finish. It could be nothing, but it stuck in my head." Lucas and Dana glanced at each other because in their file the lab had said resembles part of a T, but could indeed also be part of another letter. And hearing a child say it looked like a J made another name on their list glow brighter. James, the head of security, the man who controlled the cameras, the man who had said old footage could be tricky and edited, the man whose jaw muscle had jumped when Dr. Carr talked about someone inside helping. "Thank you," Dana said, her voice full of respect. "There is one more thing we want to ask. When you were at the house yesterday, did you see anything you think we should know? Anything strange?" Kayla hesitated for a long moment. She remembered the dark room near the garage, the glow of the screen, the way the picture of the nursery scene had flickered between two faces like someone was peeling one off and sticking another on top, and she remembered how James had smiled too fast when he caught her near the door. Telling on people was dangerous where she lived. It could bring trouble to your own door. But she thought about Ella's face when she said hi for the first time, about the plugs in the trash, about all the Bobbies in the hospital story who never got their sound back, and she knew that staying quiet would hurt more people. "I saw the man who watches the cameras changing something," she said softly. "He was watching the video of the baby in the crib. The picture kept changing. First the lady looked like the mother, then like someone else, then back again. When he saw me, he shut the door." The detectives did not move for a second. Then Lucas reached over and turned off the recorder for a moment so he could look Kayla straight in the eyes without the red light between them. "You did the right thing telling us," he said. "We will not forget that. No matter what rich people or lawyers say later, remember, we heard it first from you." At the same time in the Hayes house, another child was telling the truth in the only way she could. In the quiet of her room, while the rain clouds outside built heavier and the sound of distant thunder rolled like a warning, Ella sat on her bed with Rachel and tried to find words for the picture in her head. Her voice was still rough and small, but every day it got a little stronger. "Downstairs," she said slowly, signing at the same time, trying to match the new sounds with old motions. "Roomy screens, big man, pictures change." At first Rachel did not understand, then the signs clicked and her blood ran cold. "You saw the security room?" she asked carefully. "You saw James with the baby video?" Ella nodded, curls bouncing. "Face too," she said, holding up 2 fingers, "like this." She scrunched her face into one expression, then changed it slightly as if she was copying 2 almost the same women. That simple explanation, from a child who had always watched more than she heard, was the last piece Daniel needed to pick up the phone and call the detectives before they could even leave the station. "I think our own man is hiding something," he said, voice shaking. "Bring whatever you have, I want this done today." The storm outside broke just as the detective's car turned into the long drive of the mansion, rain hitting the windshield so hard it sounded like static. Inside, James stood in the security room staring at a blank screen. He had just finished deleting the last trace of the original footage from his private folder, his heart pounding, telling himself over and over that he was protecting the family from more pain, that it was better this way, that if people saw who really walked into that nursery 7 years ago, it would blow everything wide open and ruin lives that had nothing to do with him. In truth, he was protecting someone else, someone who had paid him good money to clean any trail that might lead back to old deals and hospital wings with hidden stories. When the detectives walked in with Daniel behind them, soaked from the rain but steady, James tried to smile. "We already went through all of this," he said. "There's nothing new on these tapes." Lucas didn't bother to sit down. "Funny," he replied, "because we just spoke to a 7-year-old who says she watched you changing faces on the baby video. We also pulled your access logs from the backup server at your security company. Turns out old systems remember more than you think. You logged in 3 weeks ago and created a hidden folder. You copied the nursery video, ran it through editing software, and replaced the original file on the home server the next day. You're good, but you're not invisible." James bristled. "You can't talk to me like I'm some criminal," he snapped. "I've protected this family for years. I've watched that kid grow up. I would never hurt her." "Then why did you make a clip that made her mother look like the one who did?" Dana asked, stepping closer. "Why did you take a video that was blurry and make it worse, not better? The company that installed your old cameras still had a copy on an old backup. We called them. We saw the raw footage from that night. The woman in the nursery is not clearly anyone. Similar height, similar hair to the mother, but different face. In the original it could be almost anyone. It only turns into her when you tamper with it." The room seemed to tilt. James opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I was told to," he finally muttered. "It was to protect the family, to give them someone to point at if this ever came back. It was never meant to go to the police." "Told by who?" Daniel demanded, his voice cracking like the thunder outside. All the anger he had been pushing down, all the guilt and fear, rose up at once. "Who told you to frame my wife and let me stand there thinking I might have been blind to the worst thing in my own house?" James's eyes flicked toward the window as if he could see through the rain to the city beyond. "You know who," he said bitterly. "The same man who helped you bury that hospital file years ago so your investments stayed clean. He came to me not long after the baby was born, said there were rumors of strange things on the maternity floor, said if anything ever happened to your daughter people might try to connect it to him because of his family name and old cases. He told me if I ever saw trouble coming I should steer it away from him. When the plugs came out and the police got involved, he called me again, told me to make sure any old video pointed somewhere safe, somewhere far from him. I never touched the kid's ears. I never went near her in the hospital, but I did what he asked with the footage because I thought the rich would handle it like they always do." Quietly, "Carlton," Daniel whispered, the name like acid in his mouth. All the times they had shaken hands, all the deals, the private jokes, the "we're in this together" smiles crashed down on him. He turned to the detective's, face white. "You have to go after him," he said. "I don't care what it does to my company anymore." James's shoulders slumped. "There's more," he said, and now his voice sounded like a tired man who had been carrying a heavy bag for too many years. "It started before you ever brought your baby home. There was a nurse on that floor who hated the families with money. She used to talk about balance, about making sure the rich felt what the poor did. She'd been involved in those cases Dr. Carr talked about. I grew up in the same neighborhood as her cousin. I heard things. One night a man from the hospital board and your friend Carlton came to me with an offer. They wanted insurance. If your baby had the same problem as those other kids, they wanted someone they could point to. They said the nurse might have done something again. They wanted me to watch the tapes, to keep copies, to shape them if needed. They paid me to set up a private archive. I told myself I was just keeping records. I never imagined you find plugs years later and drag all this up again." While he talked, the rain outside turned into a sheet. Upstairs, Rachel stood outside Ella's door and listened, hand over her heart. In another corner of the house, Miss Turner sat at the kitchen table with an old envelope in front of her, her fingers shaking too hard to open it. It had been given to her years ago by a woman on a bench behind the hospital, a woman with tired eyes and a uniform that smelled like antiseptic. "If anything happens to me, read this," the woman had whispered. "You're the only one I trust to tell the truth." The name on the envelope was written in a rushed, slanted hand, Rita. For 7 years, Miss Turner had hidden it in the back of her closet because she was afraid of what truth might be inside, afraid it would pull her into something she could not handle again. Now, with detectives in the security room and the family tearing at seams, she knew leaving it closed was no longer an option. Slowly, she tore it open. The letter inside was short but sharp as glass. Rita wrote about the anger she had carried after seeing rich families blame staff for every bad thing. She wrote about being approached by a board member with a sick idea, make certain bobbies special, so their parents would be easier to control, more grateful for any help offered, less likely to fight other decisions. She wrote about being asked to build tiny earplugs from cotton and plastic, told it was an experiment to measure brain response, told they weren't permanent, told they would be removed after a day. She confessed that after the first baby, when no one took them out, she realized what she had done. She tried to stop. She tried to speak. The man on the board and a wealthy partner told her to keep quiet or lose everything. When she refused, they pushed the blame onto Miss Turner and forced her out. I am so sorry, the letter ended. I don't know how to fix what I have done. If you ever read this, please tell someone what they made me do. Please don't let them do it again. Miss Turner felt like the room was spinning. She clutched the letter and stumbled to the hallway just as Rachel came down the stairs. Their eyes met, and for the first time since all of this began, the mother did not look at her nanny as a suspect, but as another tired woman caught in a net someone else had thrown. They did this to you too, Rachel whispered, reading the pain in her face. Miss Turner nodded, tears spilling over. She tried to tell me, she said, voice breaking. I was too scared to listen. I thought if I left the past closed it couldn't hurt anybody. I was wrong. Together they walked toward the security room, letter trembling between them like a thin piece of proof that could finally cut the right person instead of the wrong ones. When they entered, they found detectives Daniel and James all facing each other, tension thick in the air. Lucas turned when he saw the paper in Miss Turner's hand. What's that? He asked. A confession, she said, holding it out. From Rita, she wrote it before she disappeared. He took it and read, eyes hardening with every line. This gives us motive, method, and names, he said quietly. A board member and a rich partner who used a nurse's guilt to build their own power. A security chief who later helped them cover things up. A hospital that kept silent to protect its name. And in the middle, children who never had a choice. He looked at Daniel. We will be opening a case not just against your friend, but against the hospital board too. If we do this, it will drag up the file you buried, the investments, all of it. There is no way to clean only one side of this. Daniel exhaled slowly, like a man finally ready to breathe air that might hurt but would at least be honest. Then drag it up, he said. I let the first story stay buried because I was afraid of losing money. That fear cost my daughter 7 years. I'm done protecting the wrong people. When the officers came to take James in, he didn't fight. He looked at Ella, who had been standing in the doorway watching with wide eyes, and whispered, I'm sorry, kid, before lowering his head and letting his hands be cuffed. It didn't fix what he had done, but for the first time in years, he wasn't lying to himself. The arrest of a security chief was only the first domino. With the letter and the lab reports and Kayla's statement, the detectives built a case strong enough to get a judge to sign warrants for old hospital records and for the accounts of the board member and Carlton. It turned out money had moved in quiet lines between them for years. Consulting fees, security upgrades, legal support. When they followed those lines and knocked on Carlton's door with a warrant, the man who had once smiled in Daniel's office like a brother now stood pale in his doorway, hands shaking. You can't prove I ordered anything, he said at first, but fear makes people sloppy, and within hours of questioning, under the weight of Rita's letter and bank records and James's half-broken confession, his story cracked. He admitted he had known about the plugs after the first baby, admitted he had suggested using them to create sympathy cases, when the hospital wanted more donor money, admitted he'd seen Daniel's newborn as a powerful example that would tie his friend to him forever. It kept you close, he spat in the interview room, old bitterness leaking out. You think I didn't notice you buying everything and everyone like they were toys? For once, you would need me. For once, your perfect life would have a flaw you couldn't fix without help. The officers recorded every word. In the end, it wasn't just science or law that caught him. It was his own small, jealous heart. The trial that followed months later was loud and messy. Reporters lined the steps, families of other children from the old cases sat on hard benches with tissues in their hands, and the hospital tried to apologize to everyone at once while hearing expensive people to speak for them. Kayla had to stand in a courtroom she had only ever seen in movies, raise her right hand, and tell a room full of strangers what she saw that day outside the hospital and later in the big house. Her voice shook at first, but when she looked over and saw Ella sitting with headphones on, listening hard, she straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly because she knew the truth deserved to be heard in full sound. Miss Turner told her story too, not as a blamed aide this time, but as a witness who had carried another woman's guilt for too long. Dr. Carr sat on the stand and admitted he had been a coward years ago, that he had let the board silence him to protect his career, that if he had shouted louder, more children might have been spared. Daniel also faced his own reflection. Under questioning, he confessed that he had signed papers and shaken hands to keep earlier scandals quiet, more worried about his airports and malls than about what really happened to families in the wards he helped fund. There were headlines calling him a complicit hero, some praising him for finally coming clean, others tearing him apart for not doing it sooner. But for the first time in his adult life, he did not care what magazines said. The only eyes he watched were his daughter's. On the day the verdict came, the courtroom was silent as the judge read list after list of charges: conspiracy, tampering with evidence, endangering children, fraud. The board member was sentenced. Carlton was sentenced. James received his punishment, less than the others because he had helped, but enough that he would spend years thinking about the moment he chose money over truth. The hospital was ordered to pay damages and to open all their old files, to build a new independent group to make sure no one person could hide something like that again. Outside, people shouted, some in anger, some in relief. And cameras flashed like lightning around the families as they came down the steps. For Ella and Kayla, the biggest change did not happen in that building. It happened later in a quieter place. Months after the trial, the city had moved on to the next big story, but in a sunny park not far from the hospital where they first met, two little girls sat on a bench sharing a pair of headphones. Ella now wore small, sleek devices behind her ears that helped her brain catch sounds more clearly, and her words had grown smoother, her sentences longer. She had learned that noise could still be overwhelming, but she had also learned that she could control how much of it she let in. Today she had chosen music, simple and soft, playing from the old phone Daniel had handed down to her. She handed one earbud to Kayla. "Listen," she said, eyes sparkling. "It's my favorite song." Kayla slid it into her ear and smiled as the melody washed over her. "It's nice," she said. "I like when the drums come in." They sat there for a long time, just being kids, letting the sun warm their faces. There were still scars in both their lives. Lena still worked long hours, though things had become a little easier since Daniel had quietly paid off her debts and offered a scholarship fund for Kayla that would pay her school fees from now until college if she wanted it, with no strings attached. The Hayes family had closed one chapter on building giant projects and opened another on building things that actually healed. Clinics, schools, centers where poor parents could bring their children for tests without fear of bills or blame. Ms. Turner no longer lived in the mansion full-time. She had chosen to run a small daycare in the city instead, a place where parents who worked nights could leave their bobbies with someone who knew better than anyone how fragile and precious they were. She still visited Ella often though, and on those days the girl ran into her arms like always. People sometimes asked why they kept a woman so close who had been connected to such a painful story, and Rachel always answered the same: because she stayed when it was hard, because she owned her mistakes and helped fix what she didn't cause. As for Kayla, when teachers now asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" she had an answer she never would have dared to say before. "A doctor for kids' ears," she would say with a shy smile. "So nobody has to wait 7 years for someone to listen." She studied hard not because of the scholarship, but because she had seen up close what happened when grown-ups in white coats stopped asking questions. She promised herself she would never stop asking. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the park gold, Ella pulled out her earbuds and looked at her friend with a seriousness that made her look older than her years. "You gave me the world," she said slowly, each word careful but clear. "Before you it was like water over glass. I could see everything but not hear it. Now I can hear you laugh and birds and rain and when mom sings. I can hear when dad cries in the kitchen and tries to hide it." She smiled sadly at that, then bright. "I don't know how to say thank you big enough." Kayla blinked fast because tears had a way of coming when she didn't expect them. "You just did," she replied. "Just promise me something." "What?" Ella asked. "Use your ears for something good," Kayla said. "Not just to listen to people who have money or loud voices. Listen to people like my mom, like Miss Turner, like the ones who clean and carry and don't always get heard." "Promise?" Ella nodded, her new devices glinting in the light. "Promise," she said. Daniel watched them from a distance, leaning against a tree with Rachel at his side, their shoulders touching. There were still nights when guilt woke him up, when he remembered signing away the hospital file to keep his deals safe, when he heard the echo of his own silence over someone else's pain. But then he saw his child sitting beside the girl in the broken sandals who had changed everything, and he knew that some stories, even the ugliest ones, could be turned into something that helped others if you were brave enough to tell them all the way to the end. For 7 years, his daughter had lived trapped in silence because someone thought they had the right to use her life like a tool. It took a poor black girl from the street to pull out not just the thing in her ear but the lies around her too, to show everyone that truth does not care how much money you have, only how willing you are to see it. And if you are still here, listening to the end of this journey, let this be your reminder. Pay attention to the quiet kids, the ones who notice what others miss. Sometimes they are the ones who will save you when the experts and the rich and the powerful all look the other way. If this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe to this channel to support our growth, turn on your notifications, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson you're taking away. Because the next story might be the one that makes you listen differently to the people right beside you every day.